it down.
It's to the end of the line.
You have to move to the right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Crouch, and this is the Public Affairs Roundtable. We are glad to have all of you here this morning. The Williamson Chamber is the host of this show, as we now are called Williamson, Inc. Is that correct, Matt?
That is correct.
We're glad to have you all with us. This morning I have with me Matt Largen, the president of the Chamber, and we're glad to have him co-hosting. This morning, our guest, Senator Jack Johnson, the 23rd District, which covers all of Williamson County. Representative Glen Casada from the 63rd District, if I've got that right. And Jeremy Durham, excuse me.
We're not really.
Representative. I'm without Charles here. It makes it a little disconcerting for me. So, Jeremy Durham, from the 65th District, and we're glad to have you with us this morning. What I'd like to do is kind of go back to our old routine of taking about 5 minutes apiece and telling Jack first what's going on in your particular sphere down on Capitol Hill and what the priorities are as you see them, if you will, Jack.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd like to explain to people that we're kind of at that point of session where the wave is cresting. You know, we kind of start out slow and then it's like a parabola, isn't that right? And we're right at the peak of it, I would say, because our committees are, I hope to shut down the Senate Commerce and Labor Committee this week. We're going to meet, I think, at 3 different times this week, probably a total of, we're being communicated to.
Yeah, we are.
I don't know.
I don't read lips, so.
Charles is not coming.
Okay.
Great.
So anyway, the wave is cresting, and we hope to shut down my committee this week. We'll meet several hours this week. We've probably got about 30 to 40 bills remaining. But when we set out our timeline at the beginning of session, our target was to get that committee shut down this week. And so we're going to be very, very busy this week. Last week was pretty crazy as well. But then once a couple of the committees have already shut down, my committee can get shut down this week, state and local government committee shut down next week, and then we start freeing up more time to spend on the Senate floor, whereas bills are making it out of committee and onto the floor for consideration by the full body. In the Commerce Committee this week, like I said, there's probably 30 to 40 bills. Some of them are pretty contentious. I could put everybody to sleep telling you about some of these bills, but we've got an interesting issue between our medical providers, our doctors, and the insurance companies with regards to their contracting. And Senator Bo Watson has a bill, and Glen and Jeremy are very familiar with this issue as well with regards to insurance companies' ability to change payment rates during the course of a 12-month contract period. Both sides are negotiating, and we always prefer that if the sides on either side of an issue can come together with an agreement, and then we'll pass that, that's better usually than us forcing something on one side or the other. Not sure we'll get that agreement. That's going to be a big issue in the committee this week, as well as some other insurance issues that are going on. Since Charles could not be here with us, we'll divide the budget discussion up by 3. Normally we let Charles talk about that, but I'll start it off by saying it's not pretty. We're somewhere around $270 million in the hole in the current fiscal year, and this is coming primarily from franchise excise tax, which are corporate taxes that are paid by businesses. And what we're seeing in Tennessee is that some companies are leaving Tennessee because of our tax structure, and we're beginning to see that. It's kind of an 80-20, or in this case, it might even be a 95-5% rule, where you've got about 5% of the companies domiciled in the state of Tennessee that pay about 95% of those taxes, or it might be 10 and 90. But it's a very small group of very, very large companies that pay the bulk of these taxes, and they're doing like any good taxpayer. They're figuring out ways to avoid the tax. And we all do that with within the law, of course. We do that with our personal taxes, and we'll take every deduction we can get. And so that's the biggest, and one of the concerns is that this may not necessarily be just something, a one-off kind of thing. We believe that it is systemic in our budget, and this is something that is probably here to stay. So it's a big concern. I don't serve on our finance committee, but what that means is we have to find, because we're unlike Washington, we actually balance our budget, and we base our budget on projected revenues. And if we don't meet those projected revenues, then we have to find cuts in the current fiscal year. And I'm just telling you, and these guys I think would agree, that $270 million in the current fiscal year, that's significant. That's real money. When you look at our $32 billion budget, about half of that's federal pass-through money we have very little control over. You take out education and prisons and roads and some things that K through 12 education that are what we would consider quasi non-discretionary. You get a very small piece of the pie from which you have to cut $275 million. And then it affects your baseline in the forthcoming fiscal year. So not only do we have to find those cuts and find that money so that we can close out this year in balance, we have to address that moving forward. So, yes, Dave.
From what I understand, several of the other states around the country are experiencing increasing revenues because of the economy improving. Why is that not translating to Tennessee?
Sure, and it is actually with regards to our sales tax revenue. Our sales tax revenue is pretty much right on target, and that's the bulk of our revenue. I think it's around 2/3 of our revenue, 60% or so comes from sales tax. But this franchise excise tax, which is a much smaller part of our overall revenue scheme, but it's down significantly. And so that's what's resulting in the $270-some-odd million. Matt?
Yeah, does that refer to companies not incorporating in Tennessee? It's not physically moving out of the state, it's just where they're incorporated, or how does that work?
It could be either. And in fact, there's and I was asked to keep this company nameless. I'm sure they could figure out who it is. There's a particular company in Memphis. Glen, you want to chime in?
I won't mention the name.
Okay. that had a huge distribution center in Memphis. And this particular tax hit them very, very hard just by the nature of their business. They moved over to Mississippi. They moved their distribution center over to Mississippi, and now they don't pay the tax. So that's why we, again, don't think it's just something that's happening this year. We think it's systemic. And so we've had meetings with the Commissioner of Finance and Administration, and there, let's just say there's concern there about how we restructure this tax. Or restructure it, or address the issue, or just find the cuts and just make those cuts permanent in our state budget. And I think all those things are on the table. So I've rambled long enough. I want these guys to chime in on it, but those are the big issues I think, and the thing that's going to be occupying the bulk of the Finance Committee's time, I think, over the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Right. Mr. Casada.
That was well described, Senator. I appreciate that. That was really good. The only thing I would follow up on, it is going to be painful, and we are going to sit down in the next week or two, leadership committee chairmans and leadership within both caucuses, and we're going to discuss where we'll cut, because we're looking on round numbers $300 million, and that's going to be painful. Just to add to that, one of the reasons we're so successful in Tennessee in attracting industry is because of our tax structure is so favorable. But the downside is that it's easy sometimes to find, and I guess loophole is a fair word, and to get around our tax system, or and we're such a long, narrow state that it's easy to maybe adjust a warehouse. You may still be headquartered in Tennessee, and your workforce may be based in Tennessee, but you could move your distribution center across state line, and it just changes the tax paradigm altogether. So in Tennessee, we've got some things to look at and how we're going to address that. Looking at the House, I'm going to predict the date, so I hope the earth doesn't shake.
I'm
writing it down, but maybe late Friday night, April 18th. Jeremy, I don't know. You may have an opinion on that, but we're closing subcommittees down this week in the House, and that's usually a foretaste that the other committees will close down in the next 2 weeks, and then it's on the floor Monday through Thursday until we wrap up, and I'm predicting April 18th, which would be a good day to wrap up.
Wow.
I know.
I shouldn't make dinner plans with my wife for Friday, April 18th, huh?
I've been wrong once before in my life. But for some reason, we always end up to the weekend, and it's always late at night at 9 or 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the night. And so that's what we'll see. I think I'll stop there, because we'll save time for questions, Dave, if that's okay.
Sure. We'll come back. Mr. Durham?
Well, I think they pretty much covered the budget issues, but one of the consequences of that is something that many of us hold near and dear to our hearts in Williamson County, and that is the movement to get rid of the Hall income tax. Many of us know that depending on the year, 30% of the statewide revenue collected is generated from Williamson County. And there's a couple plans out there to do that. The problem is we have all these budget issues, and it's just very unrealistic to do it this year. So because of the budget issues that they've mentioned, it looks like that we probably won't be able to take another whack at the Hall income tax. That's very disappointing.
That's a great segue into one of the issues that Matt and I had discussed over the weekend, asking about. And understand that Grover Norquist has been a significant force in town the past couple weeks. He's the I don't know, his Americans for Tax Reform organization out of Washington, and they're, I think, from what I understand in the media, putting pressure on our representatives here in Tennessee to do away with the Halls tax, as I understand it, immediately, which is because of budget issues for a while. It's been agreed that's going to be phased in over several years. What about these guys coming in from Washington and telling us what to do? What kind of makes me uncomfortable? What are the pros and cons of having these guys helping us out so much?
I'll start off, and it is sad, because that was kind of the plan, unofficial plan. It was a 5-year phase-in of deleting the Halls tax. That was the plan, and last year was the first year, and then we've had this fiasco to hit us. But I guess we're used to it. I mean, everything from gay marriage to tax cuts to you name it. It's just the function of state government is folks from all across the country, or maybe domiciled, if that's a fair word. Like, for example, this example you gave with Grover Norquist, I think he's domiciled in Washington, but these groups, and their special interests, they have one issue on their mind. There's dozens of them, and they're domiciled or headquartered in other parts of the country, but they have a strong base in the state, and they lobby us on every, I mean, you name the topic, we get, and so it just
School vouchers and charter schools.
School vouchers, charter schools, and every category from, and again, I go back to gay marriage, minimum wage, is another one.
Unions.
The unions. And so it's just a plethora, it's the only big word I know, Dave, it's a plethora of entities and organizations and ideas that are headquartered somewhere else, but they do have a strong following in the state, and they use their state base to lobby for their issue with the state legislature. So it's just part of government.
Yeah, I'd say, come on in. The water's fine. I mean, there are a lot. This is not the first group that's coming in from outside the state trying to lobby us on issues. I mean, you've got unions, you've got social groups, you've got Planned Parenthood that's going to be very, very strong in this state, trying to defeat the Yes on One campaign. They were in the state trying to defeat passage of the resolution that led to the constitutional amendment. So you've got folks on all sides of the issue. I mean, the NRA is another good example, but it has huge membership in the state of Tennessee. I'm a lifetime member of the NRA. They're based in Washington, but they come in and lobby us as well. You've got pro-gun control groups that come in and lobby us. So I saw the press accounts about Americans for Tax Reform, Americans for Prosperity. Has made a big presence in the state of Tennessee beginning this year, and again, they're welcome, and we'll listen to them. And but I think that the press accounts were trying to make it appear as if they have some type of undue influence. I can speak for the members of our delegation. I mean, we make our own decisions, and we'll listen to everybody, weigh all the pros and cons of an issue, and if we have to vote against a particular group, then so be it. But we're going to make our own decisions.
Good. Jeremy?
There are some misconceptions about those groups. Like, I remember the Tennessean had me beside one of the Americans for Prosperity people. I had that Medicaid bill last year before Americans for Prosperity even came to Tennessee. So, I mean, most of these groups, like Americans for Tax Reform, will have people within the district, like within Williamson County, within Tennessee, who will email you. And a lot of times you'll get forum emails. One of the downsides, though, there was one time I was in a committee, I think it was Consumer and Employee Affairs. There was an attorney who came to represent a labor group from outside the state, and he said that people could be arrested, even though we had a cite and release statute in Tennessee. So he couldn't practice law in Tennessee and made a false statement on record. So sometimes you do have to be careful if someone is speaking like they know what they're talking about and they come from outside, if your laws are a little bit different than most. So, if there's people in Tennessee who believe a certain way, we absolutely need to listen. But we also, if they're testifying on record in front of our committee telling us what our law is, we might need to be careful sometimes.
Right. Good. Well, we appreciate your stewardship of our Tennessee issues, and know that you all listen to your constituents more than these other guys. But it's a little interesting that they will come in and make such a push like that. Education is a huge chamber issue, right, Matt?
Yes.
And you've got several things to address on that.
Yeah,
issue.
yeah, and Jeremy, you mentioned earlier about the hall income tax being disproportionately affecting Williamson County. Obviously, education is such a big issue here. It always is. It's the number one priority. It's the number one differentiator from us in really most areas across the country. So, I know a lot of, so we'll get into the Common Core in just a second, but I know a lot of the business groups have been lining up supporting Common Core, and I think one of their big concerns is that repealing Common Core equals lower standards. So Glenn, I'd love to give you the first question, and just how do you assure if a repeal goes through that it doesn't automatically equal lower standards?
Yeah, no, and I've contended all along that just because someone says it's higher standards, don't buy that hook, because I got a chance to hear Senator Alexander speak the other day, and he talked about his reforms in 1978, and his buzzwords were higher standards. It seems like every 4 or 5 years we have the latest and greatest philosophy or thought or theory come out on education, and the first word they use is it's higher standards, and it's for the children, and everyone tends to believe it. And all I'm saying this time is I think we in the legislature have been snookered enough. We spent enough money with no returns and just with the promise of higher returns. And so what I'm saying, and like 5 other states have already done in the union, Massachusetts being one of them, one of the highest performing schools in the nation, they're saying, I'm not so sure if this is higher standards. We know the Fordham Institute has come out and said what we had in English language arts was higher in standards than under Common Core. And so we do want higher standards. The legislature wants higher standards. The House, who voted to delay Common Core, wants higher standards. We're just not so sure Common Core is that vehicle. And so all we're saying is if this theory is as good as it is, let's watch it for a couple of years and let's make sure it is what they say it is before we adopt it.
Anybody else want to jump in?
Just one thing about Common Core. I publicly did not come out for a very long time on Common Core, but the thing about Williamson County is the people here really know what's going on. They're close to Nashville, they're engaged, they're educated, and I'll tell you, when I knocked on all those doors, it made me a much better candidate after I knocked on them than before I started. And it's been overwhelmingly against Common Core. So just by listening to my constituents, I'm going to support the movement against it.
And what I'll say about standards, just to echo, we want higher standards. We do, and in fact, Williamson County and Franklin Special School District consistently exceed the state standards anyway. Those are a baseline, and some would argue that the Common Core does take us backwards in terms of the quality of the standards. I'll leave that to the educational professionals because some say it does, some say that it doesn't. But again, so much of the time when we're talking about education in the state of Tennessee, we have to remember that what we have here in Williamson County, that I'm very blessed to have my 3 kids participating in, is a very, very high quality educational system. We don't have that in other parts of the state. And so you've got to bifurcate, or you've got to dissect the issue, if you will, between what's happening in inner city Memphis, what's happening in parts of rural Tennessee. And so to my friends in the chamber, both here locally and statewide, let's don't get lost on that, what we're trying to do. We want every district in the state to perform like Williamson County does and like Franklin Special School District does. So, and with regards to Common Core, what I'm hearing is that, and I believe, is this notion of central planning. And we understand Common Core didn't originate with the U.S. Department of Education, but we have entered into an agreement with this 45 state consortium that is dictating these standards, and by participation in that consortium, we're restrained from deviating from that not more than 15%. So whether you love it or hate it, that's just an important aspect of the Common Core debate, is that we are abdicating a degree of our local and state control with regards to that. And I think that rightly gives some folks a great deal of concern.
Yeah. And Senator, that's a great point about the rest of the districts not being the same as Williamson County, and that's really important from an economic development standpoint. I remember someone recently said we can't continue to count on Williamson County to be the only high-performing district in Middle Tennessee in particular. And I think one of the things you just touched on was interesting. We've got our first Outlook Williamson forum tomorrow, where we're going to really examine in depth the county's economy and look at projections going forward. And in doing the research, we found that 48% of the people in this county are not from Tennessee, which is extraordinary to me. In fact, 3% of our workforce commutes out of the state for work. So I think it really goes to the point about being a much more mobile society and how there has to be some kind of coordination if people are moving from state to state around Common Core. I guess my follow-up question to that would be, maybe this starts with you, Glenn, is what's the answer to districts across Tennessee who've spent time and money already implementing these standards?
We took a significant amount of federal money to train teachers on how to teach the Common Core standards. So, but in that regard, these same teachers have been teaching what I consider may well be superior standards before they learned how to implement Common Core standards. So when I taught school, I went through a similar thing in the, 1985. And so it's quite easy for a professional to switch hats. In other words, when I went to college, I learned to teach these sets of standards, but as I was going through my first year of teaching, the state of Indiana wanted to implement another. But I could have very well gone back to what I had learned just the year before. Our textbooks have yet, in most cases, yet to change to the Common Core implementation. So most of the textbooks that are in the classroom today or that they used last year are still on hand. And so I contend just to switch the way curriculum and standards are delivered just because we think it's better is dangerous. We've been down that road before. It's very costly with no results. And I'm just saying, let's look at like the 5 other states in this country, and let's just put it off and let's study it. Let's make sure we're going on the right path. That's what I'm advocating. Yep.
There's a budget issue that's apparently been tied to the Common Core discussion that has put it on the back burner, I think, until the budget has been hashed out quite a bit, and someone has come up with a $10 million cost to delay it. Is that real?
It is. That's pending in the Senate Finance Committee now. When the House passed the 2 amendments to delay implementation of Common Core and the park assessment, which did pass on the House floor, when it came over on message calendar to the Senate, the fiscal review attached a $10 million fiscal note to that. So I don't know what the prognosis is. That will be taken up by the Senate Finance Committee, and there's really 2 pathways. One is to address the fiscal note, to alter the bill in a form that the fiscal note gets reduced or eliminated. The other pathway is to fund it. And I guess the third pathway is to not let the bill out of the committee and let it to the full Senate floor. And again, I'm not a member of the Finance Committee. I'm not sure what's gonna happen there. Senator Frank Nicely has now found himself as the sponsor of the bill because it was his bill that did something completely different that ended up being amended. And so I suspect that the Finance Committee will begin discussing that this week. I don't know if there will be a vote on it or not, but we'll be watching that very closely because it's a very important issue. But you know, it's good and bad. One of the reasons, I don't know if folks saw recently where Tennessee was ranked the 4th best or 4th most solvent state for the long term, and we can be very proud of that. One of the reasons we are in that situation, getting back to what I was talking about with the budget, is that we balance our budget. We're constitutionally required to. We actually pay for things, and we don't borrow a lot of money. We're the least indebted state per capita in the nation. We can be very proud of that. But when you end up with an issue like this now that has to be paid for, and I want folks to be very clear, if that bill was sent on to the Senate floor and passed and not appropriated or not paid for, the $10 million, it doesn't become law. The governor would veto it probably. He might veto it anyway, but we by statute cannot, and Constitution cannot have things out there that are not paid for. Right. So I say that because regardless of where folks are on the Common Core issue, I got some calls and some emails saying that the Senate was playing games with the bill, sending it to the Finance Committee, and my response to that is, no, that's where it has to go to be paid for. If you're opposed to Common Core, it needs to go to the Finance Committee and have that fiscal note addressed. Otherwise, nothing gets accomplished.
Right. All right, switching gears, just a moment. One of the issues that's near and dear to our sheriff here in the county is the bill to control the distribution of the drug that's used in meth, as it's commonly called. And everything in life I found is more complicated the more you learn about it. It seems simple to me, but I know it's more complicated than it probably is. But tell me why this isn't true, I guess is the way I want to put it. But as I understand it, the little tablet that's used in, what's the drug?
Pseudoephedrine.
Thank you, Glen. Pseudoephedrine is the drug in issue, is the delivery method in issue. And from what I've been told, all we'd have to do to stop a great deal of this meth problem is to greatly restrict those little tablets, which then would probably be replaced by a capsule. Is that correct? I mean, that's the simple answer I heard. Jeremy, please.
I get two reasons for people being against this. It's been overwhelmingly against all those pseudoephedrine bills, at least in my district. I can't speak for the other guys. Number one is the people in my district feel that they should not be punished. They should not have to go to the doctor again. They should not have to take their children out of school if they're not the ones who have the problem. I know the sheriff has some very compelling statistics, but the people who've emailed me would counter when I said, well, do you know that this is out there? They would respond and say, well, we feel that they would simply find something else to do. It wouldn't be pseudoephedrine. There would be a new pseudoephedrine. So I don't know that I've gotten one email in favor of mandating prescriptions or going further than we currently have right now with prescriptions for pseudoephedrine. It seems very overwhelming to me that at least my district is very much against any new prescription requirements.
And I'll say the gel caps delivery of pseudoephedrine is more costly, not bankrupt costly, but it costs more to get your cold medicine, your allergy medicine in that gel capsule form than in the pill form. As a matter of fact, pseudoephedrine's gone generic, so if you buy generic cold medicine, it's very, very cheap. And so that, not that that's a major factor, but that is an issue, it is cost. But Jeremy nailed it. I think most families say, you're asking me to go to my medical doctor, take a half a day out of my time to spend, what's a doctor's office, 30, 40, 50 bucks or higher for your cold medicine and or your allergy medicine. And so in the House, the full committee is wrestling with exactly what can we come up with that will address the sheriff's and the DA's concerns, but at the same time, not a financial burden upon our families.
Right. Jack?
Yeah, it's a balancing act. And, you got two extremes here. One is just you can go into any convenience store or whatever, which is not where Tennessee is right now, but it's where it used to be. Mm-hmm. You could go into Tiger Mart, and buy a box of Sudafed. The other extreme is you have to go to your doctor and get a prescription for it. Where we are now is you go to a pharmacy and you sign the thing, you provide your driver's license, and so your information is collected in a database. It's called Implex, I think is what it's called. Mm-hmm. And so what the sheriffs are wanting to do, and the DAs, is take that even more towards prescription to where you can get a certain amount of it over the counter or through, as you currently do, but beyond that certain amount you have to go to the doctor. And so I'm watching it. The feedback I've received from my district is just like Glen and Jeremy is overwhelming about it. Now, one point of clarification. Well, two things I want to add to that I think are important points. I just heard an ad on the radio. Most people have probably heard these opposing a prescription, having to get a prescription. And one of the things they say is that 80% of the meth comes from Mexico or comes from outside of the state. It's really only about 20% that is manufactured here locally in these
Right.
meth labs. But the point is there, and I can't remember what the statistic was. I talked about it last month or the month before about how many of the kids in the pediatric burn unit at Vanderbilt are the result of meth explosions. I mean, Tennessee, even though 80% comes from outside the state, Tennessee is the largest meth producing state in the nation. We're producing more right here in Tennessee. So it is a real concern, and even if only 20% is coming from the county, there are a lot of lives that are being destroyed, a lot of kids that are getting hurt as a result of those meth labs. I think we will probably end up moving the needle a little bit, but we're not going to get, there's no sentiment in my view at all towards going for where you have to go see your doctor for it. It'll be a matter of you can get a certain amount without a prescription.
Right.
But if you exceed that amount and where that is, I don't know. Because there's some people that are on it for 6 months out of the year during that allergy season, and then there's others that might, I take it, but usually I can take it for a few days if I have a little allergy flare up, and then I'm done and I move on. But for some folks, it's a much more chronic issue, and they don't want to have to go to their doctor to get a prescription.
Understood. That helps. That's, again, the beauty of this show is we can kind of dig into the pros and cons and the ways it affects Williamson County versus the rest of the state, and we appreciate your sharing that with us. Matt?
Yeah, so let's go back to an economic development issue and really an issue around growth, and I'll just throw this up into the group. But as we've been doing some of the research for this Outlook event we've got tomorrow, one of the projections is we're going to add 24,000 jobs over the next 10 years. We know we're going to add over 1,100 students next year. So growth is going to happen in Williamson County. There's no doubt about it. I guess my question around annexation is how could that have a potential to limit growth, especially as it comes to economic development, recruiting the next Nissan as Cool Springs moves south, say the next 10 to 15 years. What effect could that have on recruiting a large company with this annexation bill?
Well, I'll start and then let these guys chime in, because we just had it in the Senate State and Local Government Committee, and again, it kind of gets to one of those issues, as so often is the case. We don't really have a problem here in Williamson County, but there are serious problems in other parts of the state. If it were just up to Williamson County, I don't know that we would be having the conversation. But effectively, what we passed in the Senate that I think is similar to what the House has passed is for the next 12 months, the moratorium will continue. That's a moratorium on hostile annexations, and it's important to understand. If you own a piece of property contiguous to the city limits, whether you're a developer or an individual, whatever the case might be, and you want that property to be annexed, you want it to come into the city, if the city agrees to it, you get annexed. It's just that's all there is. The city can annex by ordinance. If you're a developer and you go out and you buy several parcels of land because you want to build a new development and they're contiguous, and you go to the city and say, I want to buy this land, I want you to annex me, I'm going to put in some commercial and mixed use and residential, whatever the case might be, that's fine. We're not doing anything to impede that. What will change moving forward after this forthcoming 12 months is if it's what I hear referred to as a hostile annexation, or when you have an individual that does not want to be annexed, or individuals that don't want to be annexed. And in that instance, then you're going to have to, the qualified voters will vote. Now, one of the reasons we extended the moratorium, and by the way, even in instances of hostile annexation over the next 12 months, if there is agreement between the county and the city, if the county commission votes by simple majority to allow for annexation by ordinance, then they can continue to do that. After that, or I think starting with July 1 of 15, then there will have to be a referendum. I asked some very serious questions. What if you have 3 parcels of land? One is owned by a husband and wife. One is owned in an estate, and there are 10 people on the estate or on the deed. Who votes? Yep. I mean, you could have a half an acre of land that's registered or owned by 10 different people, and they're going to get 10 votes. You've got another individual that owns 500 acres, and it's just one person, and they get 1 vote. So it's very confusing. That's one of the reasons they want TASER, to the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. That's a group made up of cities, counties, the state, to continue to look at this, because it's just apparent this year that train was moving down the track, and we were going to do away with 1101. We were going to do away with the urban growth boundaries and the way we've handled it here for the last 10, 15 years. So, but TASER needs to be the group that's going to figure out those issues. If you have a parcel of land that's owned by a corporate entity, they don't get to vote, because it's the law or the bill as passed said qualified voters. Well, a corporate entity, an LLC, is not a qualified voter. So there are some real issues here that are going to have to be worked out. My hope is that TASER, including input from the cities and counties, will figure out some of these things. But your question, Matt, could it be an impediment to growth? Yes, it could be. If you've got land that is owned by someone that does not want to be annexed, and there's a referendum, and that referendum fails, then they're not going to be annexed. And so I could see it be a problem moving forward. Hopefully it's a very isolated and limited problem. And ultimately, I guess what will happen is the free market will take over, and a developer's going to be willing to pay enough money to that particular property owner to buy that property, and then the new owner does want it to be annexed, and then the problem's resolved. But
Unless it's a corporation.
well, well, if it's a corporate entity and they want to be annexed, then there's not an issue there. But if it's a corporate entity and they don't get a vote. Right. So it's a mess.
Yeah. And I appreciate the update. Someone like me who doesn't serve, say, on a committee that a specifics bill is going through, I didn't know that's where it was, and so that's good to know. I'll say this: Tennessee is probably one of only 2 states that don't do annexation by vote of the property owner. So that system works well the rest of the nation. We got to make it work for Tennessee. And that's why I'm glad to hear it's going back to TASER to be studied and figure out how other places make it work well. And that's what we need to copy and make work well as well.
I see we have Mayor Moore, Mayor Anderson in the audience, and I don't see any of the other mayors, recognize any of the other mayors, but have we covered that subject to your satisfaction? Is there something, Mayor Moore, Mayor Anderson, that y'all would want to add to that discussion? Thought there might be.
Well, thank you for your service to our county, and we think we're well represented, and appreciate every one of you. You're always very receptive to hear our comments. And I think I would preface my comments first is that we've seen a real shift in attitude, or at least on the local level, we perceive that General Assembly doesn't want Washington to tell them what to do, but we see a shift that the General Assembly wants to tell us what to do. And whether we're talking about guns and parks, or whether we're talking about annexation, or a bill that recently came to our attention is where you would restrict our ability to raise our property tax over 25%, which would ruin our bond rating, or whether you're talking about the hall income tax, which the unintended consequence is that the city of Franklin receives $1 million a year in hall tax. So we've got to make up that loss if that happens, and certainly if it's slowly implemented, that gives us a better chance rather than it just drop dead. I thought it was interesting this morning. I read you're conservative if you vote for the getting rid of the hall income tax, but you're a moderate if you don't. And you know, it's really, I hate to see us characterize it as that. And then we have the other thing that's happening is the legislature inserting themselves into transportation planning. You know, that's a very structured process where cities and counties have input, where the MPO has input and develop what the long-range plan is. And we have some concerns that suddenly the legislature is inserting themselves into the planning process, which is a concern. But back to annexation, we think is an important tool for us to have in our toolbox. You know, I don't know that we haven't had any issues with it. I think it's been a rarely used opportunity in the city. But I would follow up with a comment that a lot of the other states may have it. The word I get that what we're doing works better than most any other state that people have been in. And also, Tennessee does not have an income tax. A lot of other states do. So thanks for your service, and I'm not sure that was a question or an answer, but.
I'm not. Jeremy?
I can take at least two of them because I made the hall tax comment and I'm carrying the AMP bill. The hall tax, it was actually quite genius, Mr. Hall, whoever came up with the tax, because 3/8 of it goes to the local government, but 8/8 of it is paid by the people in the area. So you have about 30% of the statewide revenue being generated in Williamson County. Now, the thing is, for the 5-year phase out, what we were talking about doing was a hold harmless provision, which would allow the cities time to adjust their budget. So basically what that's doing is having the state cut Williamson County a check to cover it until they can figure it out. But just remember, I know that 3/8 would go to the local governments. 8/8, 100% is paid by Williamson County taxpayers. So we have to keep that in mind. Also, the AMP bill, I'm carrying that right now, unless the bill gets hijacked, which has been known to happen in the House lately. Right now, I mean, you have a state highway, and what you could have happen is there could be federal money, and then Metro could spend money on a state highway. All that my bill would require is that Metro sign off, it's in Metro, the TDOT commissioner sign off, because remember, all of these roads work together. TDOT doesn't just look at it with tunnel vision. They look at how every road works together. And if there was state money, we'd have to pass the state budget. That's all my version does. Now, I don't know if someone will try to change it in finance. I was asked to carry the bill by the Speaker of the House, but that's all mine does. It's a state highway. The state taxpayers are very invested in that. We must make sure that the state at least has an affirmative position at the table, and we're not having to react to something happening on a state road. We're just trying to make sure that we still have some say over what happens.
You know, Dave, it's an interesting debate, and if you're a geek like me and you enjoy politics and theory, there's kind of now 3 debates within the Republican states especially. You kind of, number one, you've got the Democratic, which is pretty much Washington run, large central government. But when you get down to the Republican states like Tennessee, you have 2 further debates. You have kind of the Alexander thought of let's shunt everything down to the local level. But you also have, which I kind of ascribe to, the Jeffersonian thought, which is government that governs least, governs best. So in other words, devolve power down to the voters. And obviously, I vehemently oppose the Democratic position of a strong central government. But it's a fair debate amongst the Alexander. Do we let locals take over, or do we shunt that authority down to the individual? And so it's interesting what's going on in Nashville, and that's the 2 sides you see in Nashville is from whence do we take the power to? From the federal to the local, or from the federal to the individual?
Right. Great debate that I'm sure will go on for another 200 years.
We hope.
And again, appreciate the color there. One more subject that I'd like to get a status on before we open questions to the audience. But wine and grocery stores is always a popular subject here in Williamson County. And just could you all give us a status on that? Jeremy, you're generally the last one to get to weigh in, so if you would tell us what's going on there.
We have passed something finally. It's not a perfect bill. Even if you vote in November to have wine and grocery stores, we won't have it until, I guess, 2016. Even if you voted in July of 2016, I'll just go ahead and say I'm going to introduce a bill next year to speed that up. I'm sure I'll be one of about 20 people to do that. But we had to get something passed this year. It was a very interesting coalition of people that passed it, but I know there'll be a number of people who would try to speed that up. Obviously, if it's good for July 2016, it seems like it would be good for July 2015. I mean, I will definitely try to speed it up.
Okay.
I'd just say it was a horrible bill. I didn't like it, but it's the best. It's like sausage. It was the best that was out there.
Jack?
Yeah, if you want wine and grocery stores, it's the only way we could get it passed. It's got price fixing in it. It's got this delay. It's a very convoluted, complicated bill that I wasn't real crazy about voting for, but I did want us to ultimately have wine and grocery stores, and it's the only way we could get it done.
Right. Gotcha. Audience, step up and give us your questions if you have those. Everybody is shy this morning. Gary Buchanan, recognize yourself.
It's Gary Buchanan.
My neighbor.
Thank you, Dave. As I begin, I want to thank you all for what you do for Williamson County and for the state. I have two things I'd like for y'all to comment on. One is teaching handwriting in the school system, and the other is medical marijuana. And I was going to ask about Tennessee whiskey, but I don't want to take up all the time. Thank you, fellas.
You mean cursive handwriting? Do you,
Again?
do you mean cursive handwriting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do. Yes. Thank you.
You want to jump in?
I'll start with my cursive. We did pass a bill dealing with cursive handwriting. It's my position that even though students may not use it a whole lot later, you have to at least be able to read the founding documents. I don't want this to become something that has to be like a course in school, but as long as we can guarantee that our children can read the founding documents, that satisfies me, and that's why I voted yes.
On cursive writing, there was actually school districts that were no longer teaching it, and so the legislature felt like that this was an important thing. It's the legislature's job to do the macro, the direction, and the macro course for LEAs, and so many districts were not teaching it. So we thought it was worth teaching, and so we included it in the curriculum. Medical marijuana, I'm cannabinoid oil, it's the 0.05% oil, Gary, that's being derived from the marijuana plant. It is empirical data to show that it does affect and help those that go through a extremely rare kind of epilepsy. And so as long as a product, a molecule, a compound shows empirical data that it's safe, that it does no harm first, all right, and then number two, has very positive results, I'm interested. And so we do know that the taking oil at 0.05% from the marijuana plant is very efficacious on one kind of epilepsy. Smoking marijuana for the relief of pain, for the relief of fever, for the relief of inflammation, I just don't think the data's there. And so at this point, until the data comes, I can't support the smoking of marijuana for medicinal purposes until I see more data from our medical community.
This is one of those issues, Dave, that and Gary, that is interesting because I come from a banking background and I have no experience or education whatsoever in healthcare matters, and yet I end up with a bill before me that's going to deal with providing medical treatment. The good news in the Senate is we, of our 33 members, we have 3 physicians, 2 pharmacists, and a physical therapist. So there are, we have great representation within the medical community there. This is one of those issues I have to look to the experts. We have an FDA process through which drugs are tested and they're evaluated and they're entered into the realm of treatment for medical providers. I get a little nervous when we're talking as a governmental body about circumventing that process. Mm-hmm. And not to say that it shouldn't happen, but my question is always, well, if this is such a great drug, and as Glen said, I'm convinced. I'm convinced just from people within the medical community telling me that it's effective, and then families. I had a family in my office. It's just heartbreaking. They have an 18-month-old little girl that suffers from almost a constant state of seizures unless she is very, very heavily medicated. And she was in my office and, you know, tied up with tubes and everything else. And that family is moving to Colorado because it's legal there. That's how convinced they are that it will help their daughter. So I look at that and I say, why would the FDA or the normal scheme that you go through to get a drug approved, why would they turn it down? And then there are various theories about that. So, but, you know, the General Assembly is, you know, we're looking at it, we're considering it. I think Glenn nailed it. We're a long way from doing what other states have done with regards to recreational use of marijuana or even smoking marijuana in terms of a treatment. But there are other delivery mechanisms, including this cannabinoid oil, and so it's something that we'll probably look at. But again, as I always do, I'm going to turn to the experts, not only my fellow members. Right. Just like someone in the General Assembly might look to me if it's a banking issue, and they might say, you know, what's your take on this? I've got good folks in the General Assembly I can turn to look for advice.
Great. Any other audience questions? If not, I'm going to start calling for volunteers. And the one that's probably the easiest to pick on is Dr. Mike Looney. Going back to Common Core for just a moment, there's a very loud, vocal community that's opposed to Common Core, no question about it. As I understand it, our elected school board is unanimously supportive of Common Core. Is that correct? I'm guessing.
We have not taken an official position
Okay.
as a school board.
Okay. Could you add anything to this discussion in 5 minutes or less, Dr. Linney?
That'll be a task, but I'll try. Thank you, gentlemen, for representing Williamson County. I've been fairly outspoken. This is a debate that, in my opinion, my professional opinion, should have happened 4 years ago. We've implemented the Common Core for 2 years now in Williamson County. Our test data shows that we are learning more than we ever have before. I don't know that you can draw a causal relationship between the two. I've reviewed all the Common Core standards personally multiple times, and I haven't found any of the standards to be problematic or hurtful or harmful to boys and girls. Senator Johnson said it very eloquently. Those are the minimum standards for us in Williamson County schools. We always have, we always will exceed those standards. I actually have correspondence from the Commissioner of Education that doesn't bar me to 15%. It allows us to add standards as we see fit in Williamson County. I do have significant concerns, and there wasn't a lot of discussion about that this morning, about the testing that's associated with the Common Core. I don't believe the Common Core standards are the issue. I think the testing is the real issue, and we do have some significant concerns about the testing process. One of them is readiness for the test itself, but more importantly, it's the outcomes, what happens with those results, and how does it impact students and teachers. And under current law in Tennessee, both teacher evaluations could be negatively affected, and also students, 15% of their grades come from those standardized tests. And so I have been a proponent for a hold harmless period so that the test results don't penalize students and or teachers unfairly.
How long of a hold harmless period?
Well, I'm not opposed to a 2-year period for hold harmless. I would say this: we need to give an assessment of some sort, whether it's the park assessment or some other assessment. I don't know, but I've made my position known to the gentleman here, and it's certainly in their wheelhouse to make the decision. I know this: in Williamson County, we will implement the state standards faithfully and do it very well.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Any follow-up to that, gentlemen?
Dr. Lynn, if you don't mind, speak to the fact about the technology demands for the park assessment. In one of our workshop meetings, you said something that caused me some degree of concern, that Williamson County, from just a pure technological standpoint, might not be fully ready to implement the park assessment as it was designed to be administered. And if Williamson County's not ready, what does that say about Hancock County or Perry County or some of the other counties that are out there?
I certainly agree, and that's absolutely true. You can't have low taxes and get all the things that you need for education all at the same time. And so we don't have all the computers needed or the infrastructure needed to give the park assessment. Now the state has come back and said we can do paper pencil, and honestly, that may very well be what we do the first year or two if we do give the park assessment. But that's not how it was originally designed to be given. A very good point.
The paper pencil administration of the test is more expensive, as I understand, from a grading standpoint.
Yes, no cost to the local, but certainly more expensive at the state level.
To the state to
Yes,
administer that test.
Okay. That cover the subject well enough to suit you all? Matt, did that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Linney. Appreciate your helping us understand that the pros and cons there. Gentlemen, one of the controversies, I guess, that's arisen over the past few days is the fact that Governor Chris Christie from New Jersey has been invited to speak at the Statesman's Dinner, the annual big Republican gathering that everyone loves to go to. Who's going to be the presidential nominee? Who are y'all going to support as presidential nominee for 2016? How's that shaping up?
I'll start.
Go
I don't
ahead,
mind. I don't mind starting. I'd like for it to be Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. He is a very, very impressive guy, and look, there are many great candidates. I like Senator Rand Paul. I think he's a super guy. I'm a fan of Senator Ted Cruz. I think we're going to have a very, very qualified field. I don't particularly desire for Chris Christie to be our Republican nominee. I'll be that very clear. But having said that, understand what the Statesman's Dinner is. It's a fundraiser. It's not a statement of position on who you support for to be the nominee for president. And whether you love Chris Christie or hate him, he's probably going to be a pretty good draw.
Yeah.
And so it's the goal of that event is to raise lots and lots of money for the Tennessee Republican Party so they can go out and support candidates across the state. So I have no problem with them inviting Governor Christie to be the speaker. I will not be supporting him in the Republican nomination process, though. I'll be very clear.
And I also would like to see Governor Walker out of Wisconsin. I think as we look at our next president, we want to stay far away from those that have been tainted by Washington, D.C. Matt, you talked about a 10-year plan. On our current spending spree that Washington's taken us, there will be no 10 years. And so that's why I'm proud of what the state of Tennessee is doing on a balanced budget constitutional convention. We're one now of 22 states. But back to your original question, I like the governor from Wisconsin, and Chris Christie will bring in a lot of money. But the Republicans nationwide and in Tennessee, it's a big tent. We have a very wide, diverse views, and I welcome that. It makes us a stronger party.
Mr. Durham?
Mine would not be Chris Christie, but I would just remind everyone, remember how close Rick Santorum got there for a while? Everybody kind of forgotten about him. So I like some of the names they threw out, but I'm just going to wait and see who emerges. None of us had heard of Herman Cain. Then Rick Santorum gets momentum. I think you'll see a couple of those candidates happen. So I'm going to reserve it until people actually start getting on the spot.
I need to throw in Governor Bobby Jindal, too, who's done an incredible job down in Louisiana. So there's a lot of good names out there.
And I have a follow-up for Governor Christie's visit. Are you anticipating any additional traffic problems with his visit to the state?
We're going to close a couple bridges.
Okay, just checking on that.
We've got enough.
Well, you need to have Commissioner Schroer on to make sure
Okay.
that all the traffic will be flowing freely.
That's a good idea. for
That's a
Governor
good
Christie.
segue into my favorite issue is traffic, but unfortunately, we don't have time to dig into that very deeply. But we've certainly enjoyed airing these issues this morning. Matt, tell us a little bit about the event going on tomorrow, and I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden.
That's okay. I've only mentioned it 4 times. So no, I'm just kidding, Dave. So Outlook Williamson is
Short-term memory
yeah, I
is
know.
pretty rough here.
Yeah, is our one of the 4 signature events we're putting on this year. It's the first time we've done it, and it really is an in-depth look at the Williamson County economy, how that relates to the state and national economy, and some projections looking 10, 15, in some cases 50 years out. You know, when we went through our entire process of surveying our members and finding out exactly what people wanted, they wanted access to local officials. They wanted to be in the know of what's going on from an economic development standpoint, and they wanted to get a chance to connect with their peers, and that's exactly what this event does. Tomorrow, registration's still open. It's from 7:30 to 11 at the factory. We've got a national site consultant from New York coming in, and we've got 3 local developers that are going to talk about large projects, Franklin Park, Ovation, Berry Farms, and finally end with the Commissioner for Economic Development for the state, Bill Haggerty. He's going to talk about how Williamson County fits in with Tennessee's business recruitment and expansion strategy. So it should be a good event.
Very good. We'll meet again about a month from today. It would be April 28th, I believe, to give us, and that's scheduled to be a wrap-up session. And so if we make the 18th go, Glen, we will call that our wrap-up show for the year. But really appreciate your participation this morning. Matt, appreciate your help.
Sure.
And we look forward to having you all back on April the 28th. Thank you very much.